won't lie to you. They are strong, and they are many. And we fight on the ground of their choosing. The danger we face is great. But they are Persia. And we are Greece!
Alexander the Great is one of the greatest conquerors in all the world.
King Alexander!
A successful general going from victory to victory, accomplishing seemingly impossible feats.
Alexander never lost.
The sheer scale of Alexander's accomplishments are impossible to ignore. He built one of the largest empires in human history, and he did so in just 13 years.
His craving inside to succeed drives him, but there is a dark side to Alexander.
You are no king!
He was ruthless, he was a colonizer, he was an imperialist. But he was a young man who wanted to prove himself.
What's left to fight for?
Everything.
His desire to be remembered is one of the things that connects him to us.
Alexander wanted to rule the world, and the glamour of his success shines on even in the 21st century.
There was the world before Alexander and the world after Alexander. Alexander completely changed human history.
It's 331 BC, and two empires are clashing. Persia and Greece.
If the gods were not with us, I would not lead us to battle.
The Greek army is launching a full-scale invasion of their enemies' lands.
A war between Persia and Greece is a huge mismatch.
Persia assembles an army of more than 200,000 men.
The Greeks were hugely outnumbered.
We're talking about 5 to 1. These are unthinkable odds.
Even so, they charge because leading the Greek army is their remarkable young king, Alexander.
Alexander wants to invade Persia because Persia is the last frontier.
The ancient world was dominated by the Persian Empire that stretches from the borders of India, Pakistan today, all the way to Egypt in the south and Greece in the north. It was a huge, successful, and seemingly invincible world power.
Defeating Persia has long been Alexander's consuming ambition.
When Alexander looked at Persia, what he saw was a cause. But the deeper he went into it, the more confirmed he became that this was his mission.
But if Alexander loses here, the war is lost.
Facing Alexander is his nemesis, Darius, king of Persia.
If Alexander can capture Darius, or if he can kill Darius, then it will be a tremendous psychological blow against the entire Persian Empire.
Alexander!
Everything was staked on this battle. Whoever won the Battle of Gaugamela would win the Persian Empire.
Alexander! Alexander! Alexander!
Alexander's training begins as a young prince of Macedon. a minor province on the northern fringes of ancient Greece.
Macedon is just one of a number of territories, city-states, regions that all comprise together what we think of as ancient Greece.
The main powers in Greece include Athens, Sparta, and Thebes. These are the centers of political life, philosophy, and culture.
For the Greek city-states, Macedon is very much uncultured, uncivilized, and still is ruled by this, for them, archaic form of government, which is the monarchy.
Alexander's father, Philip II, is the king of Macedon. And he ascended to the throne when his brother was killed in battle against a rival kingdom.
One of the things that makes King Philip stand out is his familiarity with violence and his willingness to use it for his own ends.
Keep moving your feet. Put your shoulder into it. Faster.
Physical prowess was incredibly important to the Greeks. It was important that they were educated, but it was nothing unless they were able to run and jump and fight.
I don't think you're really trying, boy. Come on, harder, harder.
From an early age, Alexander's trained physically. He's given great opportunity, but it's also clear that his father is the man, and Alexander is not.
Okay, stop.
Alexander has mentors other than his father.
That back, one hand. Go.
Parmenion, his father's most trusted general.
There must be fire in your belly, boy. Good. Stop, enough.
And Clytus the Black, the brother of Alexander's nurse.
Good.
We may have to keep an eye out for this one, eh, Parmenion?
Well done, well done.
Well, how's the boy progressing?
He may survive a skirmish or two.
Good.
From the sidelines, Alexander watches as his father transforms Macedon's fortunes.
The other city-states, particularly Athens, look down on Macedon. The Athenians see Macedon as an upstart, even as barbarian. The Macedonians don't see themselves that way. They see themselves as the future.
Philip's top priority when he takes the throne is to bring Macedon out of the barbarian status that it has and turn it into a world power. He wants to build up the economy, build up the infrastructure and the roads, but most especially, he wants to build up the army.
Transforming them from simply a gaggle on the battlefield who might throw sticks or stones or whatever into a fully trained armed force.
Philip's most significant change, transforming the use of a battle formation called the phalanx.
The phalanx consists of a tight formation of infantrymen, heavily armed, standing toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder, with shields interlocking.
It changes the nature of the phalanx from a defensive formation to an offensive one.
Philip adds the sarissa, a spear of about 20 feet in length, and by being about twice as long as the spear of the opposition, you can hold the enemy at a greater distance.
If every one of your soldiers in the phalanx is strong, your phalanx is unbeatable.
By 345 BC, Philip has used his highly trained army to aggressively capture territory from his neighbors.
Macedonia, at the start of Philip's reign, is a very small kingdom. But what Philip does is he expands Macedonian power north, south, east, and west during his rule.
His expansion continues year after year. Philip does spend nearly all of his reign at war.
I leave tomorrow. New campaign.
Can I come with you?
Of this time.
When?
When the time is right. I promise.
While Alexander is trained physically, he also prepares intellectually. He is tutored by the great philosopher Aristotle.
Aristotle is the Leonardo da Vinci of the ancient world. He did it all.
Aristotle provides Alexander with his foundations for almost everything. His notions of justice, of virtue, of manliness, his thirst for knowledge and information.
Aristotle also fueled Alexander's lifelong obsession with the epic poem, the Iliad, and its central hero, Achilles.
Achilles, for Alexander and for many Greeks, was a paradigm of Greek masculinity, good at war, noble, courageous.
For Alexander, Achilles is not just a myth. It is somebody that he can be. Achilles, for Alexander, is his goal.
By the time Alexander is 18 years old, in 338 BC, the southern Greek states decide they can no longer ignore Philip's expansion.
The Athenians and the Thebans create this confederation of Greek states that will fight against Philip in 338 BC at the Battle of Chaeronea, probably the biggest battle that Philip ever fights.
Now, Alexander will get a chance to show his skill. Philip's Macedonian army prepares to meet the combined Greek forces 70 miles north of Athens.
Alexander, I want you to lead the cavalry here, on our left flank. This is where the soldiers of the Sacred Band will be.
Under the circumstances, Philip gave Alexander some pretty heavy responsibility. Alexander is lined up against the Thebans and their elite Sacred Band of warriors, an extraordinarily well-trained and fierce and effective fighting force.
There are 300 of them, and they are composed of 150 pairs of male lovers. This was thought to make them fight harder in battle, knowing that their beloved was by their side.
In the more than 30 years that the Sacred Band was in existence, they never once lost a battle, and they were seen to be invincible.
Alexander is often represented as a man who knows no fear. That's rubbish. Every man feels fear. For Alexander, it is the fear of failure. It is the fear of disappointing his father.
We know they will fight to the death. And you must be prepared to do so as well.
I won't let you down. Any of you.
When your moment comes, you must be ready. That's the fight.
Alexander is assigned to lead Macedon's cavalry.
For Philip to give Alexander command of the cavalry meant that he was giving Alexander responsibility for the decisive blow that would decide the outcome of the battle.
It's an elite fighting force drawn from Macedonian nobles who have the best weapons and the best equipment and the best horses.
And it's made up of, at this point, also many of Alexander's friends.
The most important is Hephaestion.
Hephaestion was his closest friend, his emotional rock. They were raised together, educated together under Aristotle. They may have been lovers, at least when they were younger.
But for Alexander and Hephaestion, there's an even deeper level to it. They are inextricably linked together.
The Battle of Chaeronea is a very important moment for Alexander. You can raise someone and educate them to be a prince and a warrior. But until they actually face the enemy in the battle lines, they fight and they win. They haven't shown that they can really do the job.
At the Battle of Chaeronea, Alexander proves his worth. He defeats the Sacred Band. the most elite fighting force in all of Greece. And he leaves practically no survivors.
The Battle of Chaeronea establishes Alexander as a great war leader, as a leader of men, as a man who does not shrink from danger. This is going to be one of the greatest characteristics of Alexander for the rest of his life.
It's also a way for a very young Alexander to demonstrate that he is a warrior and that he could, in fact, be a future king.
Leaders grow and develop over time, and at some point we start to refer to that as wisdom. But Alexander seems almost wise from the beginning.
He was very pleased with his performance on the battlefield because he had lived up to the expectations of his father, and he had played a key role in this important victory.
You're as fearless as the gods.
The victory at Chaeronea makes one thing clear. Greece has been united, and they've been united under Macedonian rule.
Finally, Alexander's father, Philip, is supreme leader of virtually all the Greek states. He orders the defeated to join him for a summit at the coastal town of Corinth.
What Philip decides to do is to create the League of Corinth, and this is essentially a pan-Hellenic confederation. And the idea behind it is that each member will contribute a number of people to a regional army, and that they will not go to war with one another.
They have no choice, with their militaries defeated, but to make peace with Philip and to follow his lead.
The League of Corinth, we might think of it as the Greek equivalent of, say, NATO today. The Greeks coming together as part of a common alliance, setting aside centuries of warfare and competition against each other to instead stand together, defend each other, and fight for a common cause.
But what Philip very much has in mind is using the League of Corinth as a uniting force against the Persian Empire.
150 years earlier, Persia twice attempted to conquer Greece.
In 490 BC, King Xerxes I had launched an invasion of the Greek mainland, and the Greeks win a tremendous victory at the Battle of Marathon.
10 years later, the Persians had returned, now with a massive army. This time they were eventually repulsed from Greece at the Battle of Plataea in 479.
To our new alliance.
They want vengeance. Philip understands this. He is a master of marketing, as Alexander will be. And so he uses this as a campaign of vengeance on Persia for their invasion of Greece.
Before Philip is able to launch his Persian offensive, he brings his family together for a celebration.
You go in first. I'll be right behind you.
Philip II is at the height of his power as the year 336 BC comes to its end. He's summoned envoys from all the Greek states to witness the marriage of his daughter.
The bride is Alexander's sister. Their mother, Olympias, is Philip's fourth wife.
She is from basically modern-day Albania, and she claims descent from Achilles, who is the great hero of the Trojan War.
Olympias does well that she produces a son, and Alexander is the most capable of Philip's legitimate children, therefore the most likely heir, but certainly not the inevitable heir.
Olympias is a fascinating character. She's masterful, she's majestic, she's suspicious, she's dangerous, and she's ruthless. She's only interested in protecting the future of herself and her son, Alexander.
Just as Philip is walking into this wedding feast, one of his own bodyguards stabs him fatally, and Philip is dead within seconds.
Secure the doors, now!
In the immediate aftermath of Philip's murder, it would have been quite chaotic.
Alexander is king!
We're not told a lot of details.
Alexander is king!
King Alexander!
But it does seem that Alexander was acclaimed king more or less on the spot.
King Alexander! King Alexander! King Alexander! King Alexander! King Alexander! King Alexander!
You did more for Macedonia than any king before. You were a lion.
No, he was a king. A good king. But you, Alexander, you are the lion.
Olympias tells Alexander that on the night before her wedding, she is struck in her womb by a thunderbolt. The thunderbolt is the symbol of the god Zeus, who is the king of the gods, and really imbues Alexander with this idea that he is somehow of divine birth.
This is a prophecy come true for Olympias. She has always believed that her son will do great things and reach great heights of glory, and now he can.
Alexander inherits his father's kingdom at just 20 years old.
In many ways, he was ready to become king, but he's following this giant. And to be able to walk in Philip's shoes would have been very difficult. And Alexander has to figure out how to do this. He's just Philip's young son, and nobody really knows what he's capable of yet.
Alexander makes the decision to follow through with his father's plan to invade Persia.
Alexander thinks, imagine if I am the one who can bring civilization to the barbaric Persians.
But Alexander wants more than simply to invade. He wants to defeat Persia and then rule it. To do so, he gathers an army of 40,000 men.
In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander invokes the League of Corinth, marches them from the Macedonian capital to the Hellespont to cross over and begin his campaign against the Persians.
Alexander has a main force of about 32,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. So this is a hardened, battle-ready core group of soldiers.
And he's blessed by having experienced commanders of men in battle who understood how to run a war.
Alexander makes Parmenion his second in command. Parmenion, who was the friend and close ally of his father, Philip.
Clytus the Black is one of the leading cavalry commanders. He's a member of the bodyguard of Alexander.
Ptolemy is one of Alexander's oldest friends. They would have studied together with Aristotle.
Hephaestion is tasked with logistics. He is responsible for making sure that the army has food, has supplies.
Alexander and his companions, at least in the early era, would not have acted as a king and subjects, but rather Alexander would have acted as the first amongst equals.
Alexander ferries his vast army across the Hellespont and on to Persian soil.
Alexander begins his invasion of the Persian Empire in a wonderfully symbolic way. He takes his spear and he says, I claim Asia as won by the spear for myself and for my empire.
He's not won anything yet. But this is a declaration of what he intends. Alexander had an almost electric charisma. He understood the power of words and the ability to inspire people.
For him, it's the start of a journey. For Greece, it's the start of a campaign. For world history, it's the start of an epic change, and Alexander knows it. He's going to be greater than Achilles.
At the time of Alexander's invasion, in the spring of 334 BC, Darius III is the king of Persia.
Darius III was a successful and experienced commander, a skillful and shrewd politician. He's restored stability in the Persian Empire. He's deeply respected.
When Alexander arrives in Asia, Darius is well over 1,000 miles away, on the other side of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Philip had been alarming for the Persians. Alexander, not so much. He's a 22-year-old kid.
Alexander has invaded with a few tens of thousands of troops. Darius says, I'm going to let my governors in Asia Minor take care of this. The local governors collect together their forces and face Alexander at a place called the Granicus River. And they have every confidence that they are going to wipe the Macedonian army off the map.
Alexander brings 32,000 men to the banks of the river Granicus. The Persian governors have around 10,000 more.
So, they will be upon us as soon as we cross the river.
Alexander was a man who had a mission, and he knew that mission entailed risk.
Ready the troops. Be quick.
Parmenion, the leading general of Alexander, advises him not to do it, that it's late in the day, the army is weary, the Persians may have an unusual advantage with the defensive position.
But Alexander knows that he has to join battle for a number of reasons. The first one is psychological.
What would it look like if the first time we engaged with the enemy, we withdrew, we ran away?
The second pressing reason is logistical. If Alexander does not fight and win a victory early on, he is going to be shut out of the cities that he needs to provide supplies.
He's commanding the most powerful force ever assembled from the Greek city-states. He's got them unified under his command. And he knows that he has to produce results.
Fording a river and then engaging the enemy with some of your force still left is a very difficult military problem, and tactically most people don't want to do it.
Alexander understands the Persian mentality. He understands why the Persians have set up the battlefield the way that they have. The Persians think they are dealing with an older version of the Greek army, who would be heavily armored, who would be weighed down. Alexander's forces are lighter, meaning the river isn't the obstacle that the Persians think it is.
emerging into the shallows. Alexander's men faced their enemy at close range.
Trying to ford a river, people are shooting things at them. They are exposed. So this is a very terrifying moment.
From the eastern bank of the Granicus, Alexander releases his most potent force.
Alexander has the phalanxes that his father had created, this incredibly hardened and experienced battle force that is at his disposal.
I don't believe the Persians have any idea of what they face. They have now run into a force that has innovated in ways they have not seen. Plutarch talks about this as frenzied. The clash, the close order nature of it, the idea that every killing blow is a personal one. To look someone in the eyes as that happened.
And Alexander finds himself involved in a cavalry melee, spears and swords going in every direction.
The Persians know if they kill Alexander, the Greek army will collapse.
This is what warfare is. It is kill or be killed.
Alexander is knocked to the ground from his horse. He receives a blow to the head that takes off one of the plumes on his helmet.
If Alexander is killed here, the war is over. The League of Corinth breaks up. The future of Macedon is at stake.
He's saved by the speed of the sword arm of Clytus the Black. Had he been a few seconds later, fractions of a second, then Alexander might have been killed or crippled. That encounter wins the first stage of the battle. Persian cavalry is routed, the Persian infantry are abandoned by their leaders.
Once the Persian commanders have scattered, the rest of the Persian lines flee. Alexander has won an incredible battle against the odds, and Alexander's decision to fight this battle has paid off.
The Battle of the Granicus shows us Alexander's qualities as a leader in many ways.
He builds his confidence. He becomes more and more assured. His troops become more loyal. They strengthen. Everything follows in cementing his purpose and mission.
Alexander's victory sends a very strong message to the rest of the Persians. They may think this is a young general, an upstart, a child, a boy. He's a force to be reckoned with.
Alexander! Alexander!
Victory at the Granicus fuels Alexander's ambition.
He starts to think about the world as a whole, being an empire of the entire earth for which he is the ruler. Alexander's ability to visualize an empire without end, I think, far exceeded what anyone thought was possible in his time. During his travels, Alexander keeps in constant communication with those back home.
Alexander leaves one of his generals, Antipater, in charge in Macedonia. But Olympias is also there.
Olympias is installed as co-regent, so very, very important in terms of the day-to-day runnings of Macedon when Alexander was away.
Through letters from his mother, Alexander learns of a threat that could bring his campaign to an early end. Darius has sent 400 warships to attack Alexander's allies in the Aegean Sea. It leaves Alexander with a dilemma.
If Alexander goes back to aid the islands of southern Greece, then he risks losing any initiative that he had, exactly what Darius wants.
Attention!
But if he doesn't go back and help, then he risks losing the support of all of those Greek city-states. It's an impossible decision.
In the fall of 334 BC, Alexander begins his response to the Persian fleet.
Alexander's primary means of countering Darius's naval threat is to remove the coastal cities from play, to conquer them, to deny Darius's fleet safe harbor.
By laying siege to Darius's ports, Alexander ensures the Persian navy will be stranded at sea.
Because they can't restock and resupply, they can't threaten Greece any further.
Alexander can now push onward.
He's reaching away from the fringes of the Persian Empire into the heart of a world that's unfamiliar to him.
There's very little resistance, and indeed, many people hail him as a liberator.
In April 333 BC, Alexander reaches the city of Gordium, where the temple of Zeus is the site of an ancient prophecy.
In Gordium, there is an ox cart. According to legend, Zeus had given King Gordius, the father of King Midas himself, this ox cart as a gift.
The cart is tethered with a complex knot that only a future king can untie.
Whoever unties this knot becomes king of all Asia. I have to do this. This is catnip to Alexander.
If Alexander fails to untie the Gordian knot, he risks his reputation. He risks the story that he has told his men, that the gods are on their side.
He looks at it carefully, but it's so intricate that he sees there is no way that he can simply untie it.
So Alexander changes his approach.
It doesn't matter how I undo it, as long as I undo it.
There! The knot is undone.
Today we talk about cutting the Gordian knot, the seemingly impossible task that is solved in a way that nobody had thought of.
It took somebody with Alexander's ability to see alternative solutions, to think outside the box in order to solve it in the way that he did.
Tell the troops we march south.
But not only that, this is the idea that the universe itself is on Alexander's side. He cannot help but be victorious.
Gordium is a huge turning point for Alexander. After this, he's all in. He's going to stay and challenge Darius.
Darius realizes he has no other option than confronting Alexander on land.
He knows now that the only way he's going to beat Alexander in the western part of his kingdom is to face him in a great battle.
Over the next 6 months, Darius assembles fighting men from across the Persian Empire to form an army double the size of Alexander's.
Darius' solution to Alexander is to simply overwhelm him with numbers.
So Darius leads his grand army into Syria as Alexander comes south along the coast. And almost by chance, Darius ends up behind Alexander's army.
In November 333 BC, Alexander considers his options.
How many?
Many more than us.
We don't fight him yet. We take more cities, send for more men, boost our numbers. Then, we fight him on our terms. No. He has made a mistake chasing us into this valley. We fight him here, now.
The problem that Darius faces is that he is forced into a narrow coastal plain, and he is facing Alexander in a place where he is not able to use all of his soldiers at once to surround and overwhelm Alexander.
We have yet to be defeated. They will run, whilst we stand, united.
If he wins, he will have proven the prophecy of the Gordian Knot correct. He will become the master of Asia.
Eat and sleep well tonight, for tomorrow we march at dawn!
By dawn, the Persians should have been advancing. Instead, for the most part, they are standing still.
Darius's favored position is to wait for an enemy to come to him. I think that is a mistake. You give up a lot of flexibility. You basically have a plan A and no plan B. In warfare, timing is everything.
Alexander has the initiative. I can take all the time in the world I need to set this up, and I will do it on my good time.
It must have been incredibly unnerving for the Persians sitting and watching this. To have this foreign enemy coming along so eerily quiet in the way they do it and so organized. Moving as groups, not individuals.
It's not only tactical genius, it's also psychological warfare.
When he was about 200 yards away from the Persians, just out of range of their arrows, he does something really quite unexpected. He has all of his army stop and wait
Persians on the other side simply left to await the inevitable attack. That pressure built up over that long, slow march. Alexander lets it sink in.
Because Darius simply waits there with his superior army, Alexander concludes that Darius is afraid of him, that he is a beaten man.
Discovered in the ashes of Pompeii, the 9-foot-wide Alexander mosaic is the closest thing we have to an eyewitness account of the battle's climax.
The Alexander mosaic shows a very particular moment in the Battle of Issus, which is when Alexander, leading from the front, charges straight at Darius.
So there's that moment, there must have been that moment where their eyes connect.
This is no longer an ethereal idea of Alexander wants me dead. This is reality. He's coming for me. Darius has gone from I need to defend my empire to I need to save my own life.
The great king turns and runs. And once he turns, the rest of the army quickly follows him.
Alexander pursues Darius roughly 25 miles after the battle, with Darius throwing off insignia, throwing off signs of his royal status as he goes, looking to disappear into the countryside, become simply another soldier running from the battlefield.
He's defeated. The Empire is yours.
No. Not while he's still alive. And now that he's seen what we can do, he'll be better prepared next time. More dangerous.
By the end of 333 BC, Alexander's army has traveled 1,000 miles from home. Victory at Issus means he now controls the entire western part of the Persian Empire.
Hiding in the servants' quarters.
When Alexander captures the camp of Darius, he finds there the wife and the daughter of Darius.
Having been told that Alexander, as a foreign barbarian king, will have them executed, and now they find themselves completely at his mercy.
You need not mourn for your husband. He is alive and free. You're coming with us, but you have my word as guests, not slaves. Make sure they understand.
You want us to treat them as equals?
Yes, Ptolemy.
Alexander's officers, particularly the Old Guard, would feel betrayed by this. They're there for vengeance.
But he makes a very deliberate decision to treat them well. And he does this in order to show the Persian world that he will treat them well if they will only yield to him.
It's part of his innate compassion. It's also part of his leadership, because Alexander is now a political leader as well as a military figure. And he's got to rule politically.
News of Alexander's victory at Issus spreads rapidly.
Soon after the Battle of Issus, Alexander works his way down the Mediterranean coast in order to capture the cities under Persian control.
Nearly all of the coastal cities in Persia surrender without a fight. However, when Alexander reaches Tyre, his progress is halted.
Founded over 2,000 years earlier, Tyre is one of the oldest fortified island cities in the world.
It was immensely powerful, immensely rich. It was also the most important naval base for the Persians in the Mediterranean.
And if he didn't take it, it could become a source of counteroffensives against his invasion.
Very often, Alexander would send envoys to fortresses and cities that will carry his message that you will be allowed to live if you pay allegiance to Alexander.
So when Alexander comes to Tyre, he does the usual thing and sends envoys in to summon the Tyrians to surrender. The Tyrians murder them, violating all the rules of civilized behavior by any state. This is an absolute outrage.
Alexander has learned from his father the value of diplomacy. At least start there. But if that doesn't work, use shock and awe.
So for Alexander, this now becomes, you might say, almost a religious duty to avenge the killing of these ambassadors.
The city of Tyre is very well protected. It is at least half a mile off of shore. There is no way to reach it, and Alexander has no real navy and no way to attack it. And so the citizens there believed they were safe.
Scouting the area, Alexander discovers a natural sand bridge that connects Tyre to the mainland. It's around 6 feet underwater.
It's not enough for him to get his army across, but he could build a causeway on top of it.
We can use the stones from the old city ruins. This forest has plenty of timber. Here, the sea is shallowest. So?
A bridge. It will take months to build.
Water will not hand us our first defeat.
Alexander, it won't be easy.
The gods have assured us of victory. Lead me.
What he does at Tyre shows a strategic ability to see the big picture. So no matter how much effort that this was going to take to capture Tyre, in the long run, this was going to make it possible to deliver the death stroke to the Persian Empire.
They bring in rocks, they bring in rubble to form a solid surface stretching from the mainland to the island of Tyre.
There are attempts to kill the workers, to kill the engineers, but Alexander remains determined. And even when sections of the land bridge are destroyed, Alexander's forces simply keep building it.
After 7 grueling months, Alexander and his troops finally reach the city walls of Tyre, and this time, he sends no messengers. He is going to destroy this city. Alexander slaughters the civilian population for defying him, and he does so in a humiliating fashion. Alexander wants to send a message to the entire world at the city of Tyre.
30,000 women sold into slavery. 8,000 men killed. 2,000 executed. Modern historians sometimes call this a genocide.
Alexander wants his new subjects to understand that defiance will not be tolerated.
When Darius hears about the fall of Tyre, he decides to cut a deal with Alexander.
A message from Darius.
He will give up all claims to land west of the Euphrates. This is about half of the Persian Empire. In addition, Darius will offer gold roughly equivalent to about $10 billion in modern currency.
What's it say?
It is good news, my friend.
Tell the messenger I do not accept.
What? Alexander? He's offering us more than we ever wanted. I mean,
Yeah.
it's left to fight for.
Everything. Parmenion.
Parmenion gets to speak sort of as the conventional wisdom. And we are starting to see as Alexander is more and more successful, he wants to do it his way. And so you do start to see a little bit of tension growing here with this old guard that he had inherited from Philip, headed more or less by Parmenion.
Alexander is compelling because of the scope and scale at which he operates at a time when nobody operates at that scope and scale.
And so nothing's left for him except for the jewel in the crown of the Persian Empire. That is the vassal state of Egypt, and that's where he sets his sights next.
By the time Alexander had reached Egypt in November of 332, he had been on the road campaigning in Asia for about 2.5 years. He had covered 1,800 miles.
Egypt is one of the most developed territories in the Mediterranean. And so Egypt is absolutely a vital prize for Alexander to capture as part of his conquests.
It's been over 3,000 years since the great pharaohs built the pyramids. And since then, Egypt's seen 30 dynasties of pharaohs come and go.
But in the more recent history, Egypt's power has waned, and it's been controlled by the Persians since the 6th century.
The Egyptians had never accepted Persian rule. Just about every single generation had tried to rebel, tried to throw the Persians out. So with Alexander having defeated the Persian king himself at Issus, he is already a celebrity upon arriving in Egypt.
Our envoy returns. Still alive? That's a good sign. What do they say?
They will welcome you. And they want to crown you Pharaoh.
A god on earth.
In January 331 BC, Alexander becomes Pharaoh of Egypt. It's the fulfillment of his supposed destiny as a divine being.
Now, a pharaoh is a king, of course, but the pharaoh is actually equated with the god Osiris. Alexander is, in effect, being acclaimed as a god.
So all of this seems to be playing together. The stories that his mother has told him, that he has this divine background, this divine ancestry.
And of course, he believed increasingly his own propaganda, his own myth that presented him as divine and as unstoppable, as invincible. And once you believe that about yourself, there are no boundaries.
Before resuming his campaign against Darius, Alexander demonstrates his power by building a new capital city for Egypt.
Alexander decides that he wants to build a permanent Greek colony on the Egyptian coast. He's going to name this city after himself, Alexandria.
Alexandria will someday become a center for science and learning, the trade capital of the entirety of the Mediterranean Sea.
A place where all sorts of different people can come together. Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, everybody.
It will be home to 2 of the 7 wonders of the world: the lighthouse at Pharos and the Library of Alexandria.
Alexander only stays in Egypt for a few months, but his effect will be felt over the next few centuries as Egypt becomes a true cosmopolitan nation because of its introduction to the greater empire that Alexander will found.
It's now the summer of the year 331 BC, and Alexander is heading east, deeper and deeper into Persia.
In just over 3 years, he has conquered an area over 10 times the size of Greece. And his army will soon have 15,000 new soldiers.
He's heading for the city of Babylon, this ancient, wealthy city which has existed for thousands of years.
Babylon is the perfect place for Alexander, who has already declared himself king of Persia, to establish his rule.
Alexander's route takes him by the town of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq. Here, his scouts spot the Persian army is blocking the path forward. The enemy has returned, this time better prepared.
I have never seen so many men in my life.
Darius has assembled a large army. The ancient sources give us wildly large numbers of 1 million. It probably is somewhere in the order of 200 to 250,000. It's at least 5 times larger than Alexander's army.
Darius chooses the place of Gaugamela very carefully. It is utterly flat and stretches for miles in every direction. So he can line up all of his men, he can line them up deep, and he can strike against Alexander without worrying about being constricted on the sides. Darius is determined to use his numbers to an advantage.
Alexander's cavalry is his strongest asset, but his 7,000 horsemen are outnumbered possibly 2, maybe even 5 to 1. These are unthinkable odds, so Alexander is going to have to come up with a really good strategy.
He has fought the Persians on multiple occasions. He has observed their cavalry and infantry. He has seen their strengths and their weaknesses.
These are all patterns that are now part of his decision-making matrix. He has vast patterns that he can draw upon to decide how to best employ his army.
Alexander believed that the center of gravity at Gaugamela was Darius himself. And he felt that if he could kill or capture Darius, that the army would fragment.
There's simply no other way to do it. And so he has to find a way through the lines to the great king.
Just in time. Come, take a look. You will hold the left flank.
Alexander, I request, for the sake of the men, think what you are asking of them.
The same as I always ask. Everything. The same as I ask of myself.
Yes, but we have never faced numbers like this before. At least at night, we might surprise them.
I will not steal victory like that. Now come, take a look at the plan.
You will hold the left flank and the line. The phalanx is strong.
And so everything was staked on this battle. If Alexander wins, the Persian capitals are his, and with it, the legitimacy to claim the Persian throne. If Persia wins, it is likely Alexander and his army will be annihilated.
In the final moments before the battle, Alexander gives one of the most inspiring speeches of all time.
I won't lie to you. They are strong and they are many. And we fight on the ground of their choosing. But I would not lead us to battle if the gods were not with us. Today, we not only defeat an enemy, but we conquer an empire. For grace! For glory!
The Macedonian king, young Alexander, is launching a battle that is going to decide not only their lives, their reigns, their destinies, their dynasties, but also the greatest empire in the world. That's the prize.
In October 331 BC, though vastly outnumbered, Alexander enacts his battle plan.
At the start of the battle, Alexander does something that Darius and the Persians did not expect at all. He himself leads his cavalry, and he begins to lead them to the right of his own lines.
He is trying to create a window of opportunity. By riding to the right, I force them to maneuver. They have to make decisions. They have to start to move.
Alexander predicts the Persian cavalry will take up the chase and follow him, stretching their own defensive line too thin. And if the line breaks, it will leave Darius exposed.
Alexander keeps going much farther than anyone would expect in order that the Persians would follow him.
The success of Alexander's daring strategy depends upon the actions of his most trusted general.
Parmenion is the commander on Alexander's left. His job is to hold. We need Parmenion to hold his own on the left.
Alexander's movement to the right means that Parmenion on the left flank is left entirely on his own.
Hold the line!
He has no support, he has no reserves, he is entirely isolated.
If he doesn't hold, the plan doesn't work.
Darius sees an opportunity to further weaken Parmenion.
Darius unleashes his terror weapon. Scythed chariots, chariots with long, spiked blades coming out of the wheels, designed to chop up the Macedonian soldiers that might get in its way.
They're a powerful shock weapon, and Darius has not just a couple, he's got 200 of them. Phalanx has seen this trick before. As the chariots thunder in, the phalanx parts, and the chariots roar through the gaps.
At the same time, Alexander weighs up his enemy's positions.
As he draws them out, he's watching, he's waiting for the moment.
is a 30-second opening. And like a snake, he pivots that cavalry and he's gone.
Alexander's plan is to now outrun the Persian ranks, to cut them off entirely and beat them back to the Persian king.
Once that cavalry is on the charge, Darius realizes, I am in trouble.
Darius's options are to fight or flee. He makes a last-ditch attempt to wipe out the outnumbered Greek army.
Darius launches some of his best cavalry forces against Parmenion, and that left wing is in the fight of its life.
These Greeks are far from home. They know there's no surrender. This is victory or death, and that's the way they fight.
Hold the line! Hold the line! Ptolemy! We need more men!
As Alexander gets closer, he can see the king. He can end this war in just a moment.
Alexander! Parmenion's line! It's been broken! He needs help!
In the midst of his decisive attack, Alexander gets bad news.
Alexander! For Darius! If we don't stop now, we'll lose the entire army!
Parmenion says, don't leave me, boss. Ah! These cavalry have surrounded me. You got to come save us.
If Alexander chases after Darius, which is what he wants to do, he might lose half of his men. But if he goes back to Parmenion, then Darius will get away.
And Alexander makes a critical decision to save his army rather than kill and capture the king.
The Persian king having fled the battle, many in his army flee as well.
After defeating the Persians, Alexander achieves his mission, but it's not enough.
I had him. By the gods, I had him in my sight and I let him go.
You routed his army. The empire is yours.
So long as Darius draws breath, he will rally men against me. We have won nothing. His army has nothing left.
What will ever be enough?
Alexander has all of Persia within his grasp, but not the one thing that he wants most of all, Darius.
Alexander's victory at Gaugamela puts Darius on the run.
Gaugamela wins the war for Alexander. This completes the conquest of Persia. But Alexander will not give up the pursuit of Darius. He pushes on into the heartland of the empire. He overruns the famous cities, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and he keeps on going. But there's a changed mood in the army because everyone can sense that they've won. So they're starting to think, well, why are we still fighting? Why are we still chasing? Can't we enjoy the glory, but also the rest, but also the spoils?
By June 330 BC, after 5 years away, there's dissent in Alexander's camp.
Clitus, his foster brother, and another childhood friend, Ptolemy, do not like the change that they see in Alexander once he conquers Persia. They feel Persia has conquered him.
Alexander learns of a possible conspiracy brewing in the ranks. Talk of assassination.
My king, I must warn you. There is talk among the troops.
Go on.
They complain. What?
The details are quite murky, but what we do know is that there was a connection between talk of conspiracy and Philotas, Parmenian's son.
Give me more wine.
Alexander takes the rumors as a chance to move against Parmenian's son, to have him tried before the entire army, and to have him executed for treason.
It's not clear whether Parmenion ever had any part of this plot or knew about it at all. But what is clear is that after Alexander has a son put to death, any chance of the two of them being friends and allies after that is pretty much gone forever.
Alexander acts to prevent retaliation from a grieving Parmenion. He sends him on a scouting mission.
Send a message when you arrive. Let me know what you learn. Travel safe.
You as well, Alexander. You as well.
After fighting in battle after battle, with Philip first and then with Alexander, Parmenion's fate is to be stabbed to death by one of Alexander's soldiers on Alexander's orders.
Onward!
This is a very sad ending for Parmenion. Parmenion had been a very loyal retainer, he had been a very effective general.
We understand, on the other hand, Alexander's point of view. Once he had killed his son, he really didn't have much of a choice, except to kill the father.
In the aftermath of the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander becomes more lonely, more isolated, more paranoid, ever more obsessed with challenges to his power, to his crown.
Alexander is trying to build himself up into what he thinks he needs to be to rule over this vast empire. But he is increasingly finding that he is losing his friends, that he is losing what it is that made him great in the first place.
So it is getting more and more tense, more and more difficult, and Alexander's solution is to keep campaigning.
Alexander doubles down on his singular obsession, capturing Darius.
Alexander learns that Darius has been sighted in northern Iran, heading into the regions of Bactria and Sogdiana in modern-day Afghanistan.
So to catch up with him, Alexander drives his men 450 miles over a 3-week march, including a brutal 200-mile stretch in just 11 days.
Alexander doesn't rest. He keeps pushing his men farther and farther beyond their physical limits.
Again and again, he demands more from them than could reasonably be expected, and again, they deliver.
Found something.
What?
Come see for yourself.
Come on. Alexander and his men have traveled 5,000 miles and haven't set foot in Greece for 4 years when they finally find Darius.
Where are they? Fled. And Darius?
Pursued by Alexander's troops with no respite, Darius's nobles make the terrible decision to essentially betray him. They stab Darius and leave him bleeding by the side of the road.
For Alexander, the death of Darius means he's won. He has avenged the Persian invasions of Greece. His whole reason for having begun this invasion in the first place has been achieved.
You are now truly the Lord of Persia.
The King of Kings.
He'll have a king's burial. Take him back to rest alongside his ancestors.
Leave him where he fell, surely.
We shall do as he said.
Alexander was very sad at Darius' fate. He was outraged, in fact. Alexander, by all accounts, treats Darius as his legitimate predecessor and indeed tries to defend his memory by chasing and killing the assassins of Darius.
Alexander.
The Macedonian soldiers begin to discuss going home, returning to their families, and what it is they're going to do once they get back.
To the Lord of Asia. To the fallen.
Look here. We need to go north and east. That is where Darius' men are hiding.
The men are celebrating, Alexander. Let's join them.
Ask Clytus when the men will be ready to travel.
Ask Clytus when the men will be ready to travel.
Alexander's goal all along was to conquer Persia, to bring Greek culture into Persia. He does that. Stop. He can't stop. This has now become almost a primal urge to go as far as he can go.
Alexander is both a conqueror and an explorer. For him, there never is an end. There's always another land to conquer, another feat of glory to achieve.
In March 327 BC, 3 years after the death of his old enemy Darius, Alexander and his men are still on the move.
His army cuts through Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, the Western Himalayas, and even a part of the Hindu Kush. I mean, this is undiscovered territory for a Greek.
These areas rebel very quickly. They've been difficult for the Persians to control because the people there are fiercely independent. So Alexander fights some of the most vicious campaigns without the dramatic battles, without the Gaugamelas, without the Issus or Granicus in these years.
He realizes he's got to manage, not just lead in war. He's not an instrument of chaos. He's a foreign element injected into an existing civilization. And he takes from that civilization and learns from it and gives to it.
Through his travel, Alexander retains his relationship with his former tutor and great philosopher, Aristotle. Alexander writes regularly to Aristotle, sends him samples of plants and animals, clothing and artifacts. And it is likely that many of these subjects and insights made it into what we now know as the founding moment of biology, the idea of classifying nature systematically and thinking about it scientifically.
There's this word that got attached to him, hothos. It's like a longing to see something new. He was fascinated by other cultures, other peoples.
That range there. How long do you think it would take to cross?
Alexander, what are we still doing here? There's nothing left except rocks. You're a Macedonian king, and a Macedonian king must return to Greece.
We have come further than any Macedonians before us.
Look at these people. These people need us.
Now, deep within the mountainous region of modern-day Uzbekistan, Alexander has taken a mighty fortress known as Sogdian Rock.
Alexander welcomes those who surrender to him without a fight.
What's your name?
I'm the daughter of Oxyatis, Lord of Sogdian Rock.
That's very impressive. But what's your name?
Why do you care?
Because out of all of you here, you're the only one who's not afraid of me. I'm Alexander.
My name is Roxanne.
Roxanne is a woman of unparalleled beauty, but she's also potentially the source of what Alexander needs more than anything, an heir.
And he thinks that having an heir with Persian blood will really solidify the connections between the two kingdoms.
Alexander's decision to marry Roxanne was not out of some romantic urgings. It's pure policy.
His advisors, particularly some of the older guard, are like, no, what do you think you're doing? But Alexander understands he's doing what Philip, his father, had done before him 7 times. Marry your way to peace.
But that decision reveals that he didn't necessarily understand the strength of feeling that men in his inner circle had in terms of their own ethnic values and beliefs. In particular, Clitus, who gets very upset.
His relationship with his generals goes from one of the first amongst equals, essentially a group of men deciding the future together, to a more tyrannical model of rule, where Alexander is evermore the great king.
By this point in time, Alexander is drinking a huge amount. The Macedonians already have an established drinking culture, but Alexander's so-called sort of insatiable fondness for wine really seems to go to a different level.
And his patience begins to thin. His allowance of people questioning his authority begins to get a little bit tight.
We don't exactly know what happened at this feast, and it's not really surprising given the general level of intoxication. What we do know is that Clitus, always hot-tempered, was stirred up, probably because of all of the Persians that were at this feast.
I must ask you, Alexander, are you a Greek or a Persian? Are you a man or a god? Would you find out, Clitus? You're no god. You're not even half the man your father was. Alexander, you dare to strike me? Huh? You dare to fight me?
Come on.
You are nothing. Just leave it. You are no king. Leave it. You are me.
Killing Clitus is all the more tragic because Clitus hasn't just been loyal. Clitus has been fighting literally side by side with Alexander and has saved his life several times, including at the Battle of the Granicus.
He's broken the sacred bonds of trust that built the army together. Still, he's Alexander. He's unvanquished. He's the leader. You can't abandon him, but he's not the same person. He's wearing these Persian robes. He's not our man anymore. Who is he?
By the fall of 327 BC, Alexander has traveled more than 6,000 miles.
You are no king!
His campaign is taking its toll.
You're not even half the man your father was.
After Alexander kills Clitus, there is a change in his behavior. There's a depression, I guess you could say, that just doesn't leave Alexander at this point.
Oh, man. In mourning. They want to go home.
Near.
Wherever Alexander is, that's my home.
Alexander seems to start changing psychologically. He hides from everyone for days on end. And at this point, he seems to suffer ever more the tragedy of his distance from Greece, the original world that is slipping from his hands.
Still, Alexander's desire for conquest drives him on.
Alexander heads south, following the Hindu Kush mountain range, going through the Khyber Pass, and ultimately into the Indus River Valley in modern-day Pakistan. Upon entering India, Alexander has officially gone off the Greek map. But Alexander believes that there is an end point. There is a point where the world stops. Alexander finds that what lies next is not the end of the world at all, but is in fact the Nanda Empire, an empire that has a massive standing army of 200,000 strong, 4,000 war elephants, 6,000 chariots, 40,000 cavalry, all of which are highly trained and mobilized and ready for Alexander's forces.
He learns that the world is so much bigger than he ever thought it was, and it makes him determined to keep pressing on in order to conquer the world.
In 326 BC, Alexander has marched his army 11,000 miles, nearly half the circumference of Earth.
By the time they arrive at the Hyphasis River in India, the morale of Alexander's men is borderline mutinous. They don't know when they're going to stop, and they're essentially waiting for geography to stop Alexander. If the world does not end, then they might be fighting forever.
My king, we cannot continue.
This is the line in the sand for his men. He cannot push them any further.
Alexander's troops demand to turn around and go home. He tries to get a handle on the situation, but this is too big for him. His charisma that had driven his army for 10 years across all of the known world had essentially run out at this point.
Stand!
Take it. Take it.
Coward!
He hasn't been defeated in India. He's been defeated only by his own soldiers that insist that he turns around.
Alexander relents, and in August 326 BC, begins to lead his army home. But he does not intend to take his men back the way he came. He seeks a new route.
Alexander discovers that the Indus River connects with the Persian Gulf. It holds the possibility of a quicker route to Persia.
He splits his army into separate units.
One that would return by sea, and the other half led by himself that would cross the Makran Desert.
The route that Alexander takes is one of the most inhospitable places on earth.
It was a horrific desert with no features, unmapped and unknown at the time, with no cities, oases, or stopping points.
But because he suffers all the dangers and deprivations from his troops, he marches when they march. He's hungry when they're hungry. He's thirsty when they're thirsty. He makes them feel like they are part of things bigger than themselves.
This is all there is, my king.
A brave warrior has handed me a helmet, half filled with water, all that he could find. But the king drinks when his men drink. If his men don't drink, no one drinks.
This one simple gesture inspires the men. Whatever thoughts they had about Alexander, whatever doubts, disappear in this moment of sacrifice.
It takes Alexander's armies the best part of 6 months to travel back to Persia's heartlands. They arrive in the city of Susa in the spring of 324 BC.
It becomes clear that Alexander has no intention of ever returning to Macedon, that he will be sending his soldiers home, he will be sending veterans home, but Alexander himself will be staying in the new domains that he has conquered.
He's now spent about 10 years there. That's nearly a third of his life. He's adopted Persian customs, he's adopted Persian dress, and why not stay in Persia? It's the center of the world.
For Alexander, it's time to consolidate power.
If you're going to administrate well, you have to stay put and figure out how to make this empire work. He ends up picking somebody to do that for him, and that's Hephaestion's role.
Then Alexander arranges the marriages of his Macedonian generals to Persian princesses.
Alexander's trying to fuse together the elites of Macedonia and the Persian Empire by creating them into married networks that will owe loyalty to one another. That this is not so much a change of identity as much as a change in political commitment. Alexander is moving from king of Macedon to king of the world.
Ptolemy, this one's for you. The only way to truly rule Persia is to establish Macedonian blood. Enjoy it.
Alexander takes 2 more wives for himself, the youngest daughter of one of the Persian generals, and also he marries the oldest daughter of Darius, so he's going to become a polygamist like his father.
Hephaestion, meet your new wife.
For his best friend and loyal retainer Hephaestion, Alexander arranges a marriage with the best bride available in Persia, one of Darius's other daughters. This makes Hephaestion essentially Alexander's brother-in-law.
This is for us. Our children will grow up together, like we did. They will share the same blood.
It is possible that Alexander hoped and planned to grow old with Hephaestion in Persia, to raise their children together as Hellenic Persians, essentially to establish himself, Hephaestion, their families for the future.
Just 7 months later, in the fall of 324 BC, Alexander's plans are derailed. He receives devastating news.
The culture of drinking in Alexander's army seems to get even stronger. Lots of parties, lots of celebrations. And Hephaestion becomes ill after one of these drinking bouts.
Alexander, hearing that the health of his closest friend is declining, makes his way to Hephaestion's side, but doesn't arrive in time.
Sleep well.
Hephaestion is really his emotional touchstone. His bedrock is gone. The man who he had hoped would help administrate his empire is gone. What is he going to do?
When Hephaestion dies, Alexander loses his mind. Alexander is so distraught that he blames the doctors that failed to save Hephaestion's life and has them all crucified. He withdraws in agonizing pain and mourning and sadness.
In the spring of 323 BC, Alexander emerges from mourning with a new vision for his future.
Alexander decides it's time for another conquest. This time he sets his sights on Arabia, another land that's associated with opulence, riches, and exoticism.
Alexander knows what he's good at. I think he fears that if he stops, the music will stop.
And so he sends out some troops on a kind of exploratory mission. But he himself will never make that trip.
In 323 BC, Alexander arrives in the Persian ceremonial capital of Babylon. His health declines rapidly.
He is struck with severe stomach problems. He begins passing blood. His fevers begin to spike, and he passes in and out of consciousness.
Was it a poisoning, which was very common in the Macedonian circles? Was it an illness?
It could be malaria, it could be typhus, it could simply be all of the accumulated injuries of his long campaign.
What we do know is this is a man that lived hard.
The mood of his inner circle is desperate. They're very concerned. What is going to happen to Alexander's vast empire?
We must make provisions for the future. Name a successor. An heir. That's all I ask of you. Go. Calm.
I will rule! I will rule!
Think of Greece. Think of all we have fought for.
The strongest, the best.
He says, to the strongest, to the best.
In June of 323 BC, Alexander dies. He is just 32, and his refusal to acknowledge any of his companions as a worthy successor is a disaster, seeding the collapse of his entire empire.
Alexander dies too soon, too young. He leaves an empire that's conquered and just about established, but hasn't yet settled into a system of government. So everything is to play for.
His wife Roxanne is pregnant, and the child in the womb is proclaimed king if it turns out to be a boy, as in fact it does.
But this young child, of course, is in no position to rule a kingdom.
By the time of Alexander's death, his empire stretches from Greece to modern-day Pakistan and down into Egypt. It's around 2 million square miles in terms of territory, which is bigger than the Roman Empire will ever become.
As for the rest of the empire, various generals begin a war for supremacy and control over the entire thing. Alexander's vast empire breaks up into several different kingdoms, never to be united again.
Ptolemy takes the biggest gamble. He claims Egypt, the jewel in the crown of the Persian Empire.
Ptolemy is actually able to carve out a stable and successful kingdom in Egypt. More than 200 years later, his direct descendant, Cleopatra, comes to the throne.
Histories look back on Alexander traditionally as a romantic figure of immense glamour and success. In battle, he proved capable of original and bold tactics, incredible personal courage, quick decision-making, and limitless ambition. And of course, success breeds success.
And we are Greece!
Alexander's story shapes the centuries that follow because he becomes a model for every ruler, every potential general, every want-to-be king for centuries thereafter.
There are few, if any, human beings in history that have as great an impact as Alexander does.